Does this bring you joy? What the fuck is this mess? My darling husband yelled from the floor below. I didn't respond. I don't yell or respond to profanity. Also, I was surrounded by our stuff, and I wasn't sure I could get out of the mess with grace. I smoothed out my blouse, cardigan, and skirt while I waited on the wall-to-wall carpet of our bedroom. I made sure to cross my legs and picked a piece of lint off my tights while I listened to him curse as he navigated the maze I had backed myself into. I assume you're upstairs, and this mess continues, he said, probably at the foot of the staircase. He knew I wouldn't respond until he was standing within my eye line. He exhaled, exasperated, and stomped up the stairs like he was trudging through mud, his steps uneven as he avoided more items. What the fuck are you doing? My darling husband asked when he saw me surrounded by our clothes. He was wearing one of his many tailored suits. I could see the wrinkles in his shirt, and his silk tie was loose around his neck. I was sure he wanted to change his clothes, head down to the basement, and ignore me for the rest of the evening. I doubted he could find the hideous tracksuits he liked to wear down in his man cave. I had already put them in a trash bag and placed the bag in my SUV to take for donation tomorrow. I am trying to end our dependence on things, I said, calm and rational, my smile reminding him that it was obvious. How do my clothes fit into this category? He motioned toward the pile of his business suites on our king-size bed. I closed my eyes and took a deep, cleansing breath before responding. I pulled them out to see if they bring me joy. The way he pressed his lips together and the flare of his nostrils made his feelings clear. Why should my clothes be something for you to worry about? He finally said. I pulled out everything, I said, gesturing around the room. I'm going through everything. He lifted his leg and looked for a spot to put his foot, trying to get to the bed. It took him a few seconds, but he got there and snatched the pile of expensive suits I had carefully laid down. He kicked down the carefully organized piles of my clothes between him and the closet. When he got to the open closet doors, he slammed his hangers back on the suit rack. Do not touch my things, he said when he turned back to me, leaving to search for his track suits. I looked at his feet and sighed. At least he wasn't wearing his dirty shoes on my perfectly clean carpet. My home needs to be a perfect reflection of my inner peace. That's the way I wanted to live my life. It shouldn't be difficult since it was just my darling husband and myself. No children or pets should make it easy to live the life I want and have my home reflect that. Our kitchen was state-of-the-art, with every modern appliance we could ever need but rarely used. I'd meticulously selected every piece of furniture to make my home look picture perfect in shades of gray. Glass, granite, chrome, and microfiber covered surfaces and fixtures. No knickknacks sat on surfaces, everything was stored in its place. Books were recovered to match each other. The technology was hidden. It was all the way I wanted it to look. I hated all of it. I'd woken up on New Year's Day feeling unhappy. We had gone out for dinner. Neither of us had spoken. I'd watched my darling husband get drunk, and then I'd driven us home in his obnoxious, tiny sports car. I'd felt every bump and pothole as I'd struggled to drive the stick shift. I had put him to bed in our perfect room and realized I was miserable. Nothing in this house made me happy. It was no longer a reflection of my inner peace because I no longer felt that. Pet, how did you manage to get all your clothes cleaned up? My darling husband asked me later that night as we got ready for bed. Not only I had put all the clothes away, but I had ordered a wonderful dinner. I took a deep breath and felt my lips curl into a smile. I realized all my clothes bring me joy. He was down to his boxers, and I sighed in disappointment. This man was no longer who I had married. Once, he'd wanted to build the perfect life with me. We'd had plans for 2 perfect children, 1 boy and 1 girl. I'd even had names picked out. We would vacation in the Caribbean when they were young, then we would vacation in the Mediterranean when they were in college, but in the end, we would go back to the Caribbean when we had grandchildren. We would have ski trips, cruises, and our lives would be full of joy. He didn't tell me about the vasectomy until after the wedding. He didn't want kids and, even if I had been willing to adopt, he didn't want to raise someone else's kids. My smile faded as I looked at him with his beer gut. He had the perfect life, and I had to be happy with the perfect house. Keep my clothes out of your crusade to middle-class scarcity, he said, getting into his side of the bed. How much of this stuff really makes you happy? I asked him, turning on my bedside light before pulling up the covers. I wanted him to see how unhappy I had been. I might have just realized it in the last few weeks, but this had been a problem for a long time. I hoped he would realize he felt the same way, and we could build a new life together. Everything in my life brings me joy, he said before rolling over onto his side away from me and turning out his light. I sat in the king-size bed, realizing the chasm between us had become physical. Maybe decluttering our house could remove both the physical and emotional distance between us, and we could find our way back to our perfect plan. Where's my iPod? My darling husband asked the next evening when he got home. Which one? You had one from every generation. I said. Tonight he didn't come into the house complaining, and there was no mess for him to walk over. The frenzy of my first day of decluttering had become structured and methodical. This morning, I'd taken 5 boxes of unused and out-of-date tech to a local shop that recycled them. This had been in addition to the bags of his ugly tracksuits. Yes, I'd made sure to do it well before my darling husband came home. The first generation with the spinning wheel, he said. We were in the office together. I was sitting at our shared desk, putting junk into boxes. He opened the box at the other end of the room and began removing items. I took it to be recycled, I said as I got up and moved over to him, returning the items to the box. Those items don't bring me joy. I used the iPods as hard drives for important documents, he yelled. I ignored him and finished filling the box. I walked back to the desk and continued sorting through items. I placed everything neatly on shelves above the desktop, wiped down any lingering dust, and put pens in a cup that matched the paper blotter. I had already ripped off the page that had been full of scribbles from someone testing pens. The tech I had kept was tucked away in a drawer so it could be easily found when I needed it. Pet, did you hear me? He asked, taking a deep breath and exhaling to relax. I used them to store our most important documents. How did a 5 GB iPod get used to store our important documents? I asked without looking at him. You're the CIO of a major corporation. You'd be fired if someone found out anything important was on those drives. I heard him yell with rage, but I refused to give him the attention he wanted. Where are they, Pet? He said, and I heard the box contents clatter as he slammed it on the carpet. I took it to be recycled, I said with a shrug. I continued to work as I listened to him run down the stairs, slam the front door, and start his car. He didn't come back until I was already in bed. I kept my eyes closed, but he knew I was awake. He didn't say anything aside from elongated sighs and groans. When the light went out, he and I were lying on opposite sides, back to back, with the chasm of the empty bed between us. Why did we have such a big bed? I had hoped it would be full, our children climbing into our bed, late at night, to cuddle before falling asleep, safe from their nightmares. He had denied me that, and now I was left with an emptiness I had filled with things I didn't really need or want. Pet. Where did the television go? My darling husband called down the stairs. I had spent most of the day in the den, continuing to get rid of the tech abandoned in the house. My instincts told me to get rid of the massive 86-inch television he had mounted over my beautiful fireplace. I had temporarily replaced it with a landscape painting I had purchased years ago, one he hated. I needed to figure out a better way to hide the holes in the wall and cables protruding from them. The painting would be adequate while I found something perfect. It made the room feel serene and peaceful. I waited for him to come down the basement stairs to talk to me, bracing for a fight since I was close to his man cave. I sold it to someone online, and they picked it up this morning, I said when he was in the basement. That television was expensive. What the fuck were you thinking? It wasn't bringing me joy, but the kid gave me $50, and we can use it to go out for dinner, I said. I felt the stress and anxiety of my life tumble from my shoulders and sat up straighter as my darling husband's face turned red with rage. The previous owners had built shelves in the basement to improve storage. My darling husband had commandeered half the space for his man cave, putting up temporary walls, like a cheap cubicle, to set his space apart. He had a second, larger television on a wall, a fully stocked bar, and posters of expensive sports cars. I once had fantasies of finishing the basement for a child's playroom, working up designs to make it safe and sturdy. Then our plans had changed and, other than the man cave, all that remained was moldy furniture, damp and decaying boxes of old moldy clothes, and things we had inherited from other relatives. I had managed to put things into crates and on the shelves. I had organized a furniture pickup earlier that day and all the moldy pieces had been taken to the dump. The empty space made it easier to breathe down here. Now I played with fantasies of a home gym, complete with a brand new stationary bike so I could get back into shape. That television was worth $2,000. You got $50 for it. He yelled as he stomped back up the stairs. Like I would ever go out for dinner with you after this. I felt my shoulders sag as I realized we only went out together when we had to make an appearance. In the 5 years of our marriage, we had never gone out to simply enjoy each other's company or to have a romantic dinner just because. It was always a show, even when we went out for holidays. We had to make sure people thought we were happy. I pulled up to the house after dropping off the last load of donations. I saw my darling husband's expensive sports car already in the driveway. The trunk of the car and front door of the house were both wide open. I got out of my SUV and walked into my perfect home, closing the door behind me. Petra. I heard him yell down to me from our bedroom. I declined to respond. Instead, I went into the den to start a fire in the fireplace. I wanted to sit by the fire, a blanket over my legs, and a cup of tea on a table next to me. I looked around the room and saw the armchair I could move. I would buy a new side table that would fit perfectly between the fireplace and the armchair. I could see it all in my mind, and I wished I could make it happen right now. At least I could start the fire. I always had newspaper to help me start the fire, kindling to make it grow, and logs to look beautiful as it burned. I busied myself, making my vision become a reality as my darling husband continued to yell. I took my time layering all the elements to get the fire going. If my darling husband wanted to talk to me, he knew to come downstairs. I wasn't going to rush for him. I was tired of accommodating him. As the fire grew, I went back to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. As it steeped, I went back into the den, took the fire iron, and stoked the fire. I looked around the room, pleased with how much clutter I had gotten rid of. Removing the television and all the computer equipment was the right decision. It was going to become my favorite room in the house. "Pet, where did you take all my stuff?" My darling husband finally came down the stairs. His face was bright red, and he was sweating. In his hand, he held a full duffel bag. I had left his precious suits in the closet, and now he had rolled them up into the bag. It would be his problem to get rid of the wrinkles. "It wasn't bringing me joy," I said, reminding him of my purpose for the past few weeks. "It wasn't yours to consider." He dropped the bag and balling his fists. "It was in my home," I said, and walked back into the kitchen to get my tea. He followed me, stomping his feet on my perfect hardwood floors. "This is our home. I live here too." I slowly pulled the tea bag out of my mug, squeezing out the excess water. "You can keep your toys at your office." I turned to face him, so I could go enjoy my tea by my fireplace. "I work from home as well. You had no right to give away my things." His face only got redder as he yelled at me. I had no right. My anger and my voice rose. "No right? What about the things you promised me before we got married? All the things you changed your mind about after our wedding day? It's not my fault you live in denial. I told you I had changed my mind about a family. You didn't care because you wanted your $100,000 wedding and your $1,000,000 home. You knew what I wanted. You should have called it off." I wasn't thinking as I threw my mug at him. Hot tea splashed on his arm, and the ceramic mug smashing as it hit the wall, just missing his head. "You bitch!" he screamed, his hands covering his face. I grabbed the fire iron and swung without thinking. I slammed it over and over across his head and back, not noticing the blood flying around my perfect room, spraying on the white rug. I don't know what made me stop, but I looked around at the gore as I caught my breath. Brain matter sat in chunks on the fireplace mantel. The beautiful landscape painting was now like a piece of modern art, covered in beige and red. The blood splattered the white rug, but, where my darling husband's body laid, it pooled and spread as the fibers absorbed. I must have driven the poker into this stomach. I could see his intestines peeking out from under his body. Even I was covered with his insides. I recognized the smell of his body defecating. The rug would have to go. I would get online and buy a new one tomorrow. I had already picked out the perfect one. I thought about that rug and the new decorations I would have to purchase to replace what he had ruined. I walked into the kitchen, trailing blood behind me, and grabbed my largest, sharpest knife. I would also need to wash the walls and mop with bleach. He had destroyed my dreams and forced me to fill the void with stuff I didn't want or find joy in. He only had himself to blame. This was all I thought about as I cut up his body like it was nothing more than a Thanksgiving turkey. It was pitch black in the grocery store parking lot when, hours later, I pulled up next to the charity trailer. There were other boxes there, left by people who had come after they'd closed. This was the time of day when people just left the items they knew the charity wouldn't normally take. Tonight, I would just leave this one last load so I could go back to cleaning my perfect home. I turned off my headlights and popped the trunk. One by one, I pulled out the plastic trash bags and put them next to the staircase. I taped my note to the heaviest bag. He didn't bring me joy. This story was originally published in Wicked Women, an anthology of the New England horror writers. It was also republished in #RescueMe by Sara Marks. Like or subscribe to this YouTube channel for audiobooks and more.